Talking today with Derek Black, who was raised by prominent white nationalists and was poised to be the next leader of the movement. At age 19, he won a precinct election for a Republican executive committee seat in Palm Beach, but was disqualified for failing to sign a loyalty oath. And then he went off to college. So, Derek, your godfather was David Duke. He's over at your house. Your dad, at one point, was the leader of the Klan. I mean, honestly, what was the discussion like? Because you say, it wasn't about hate. What we know from other, Klansmen is that the N-word is freely thrown about, and that's the kind of talk.
Yeah. No, my family never used racial derogatory language, didn't use curse words, tried to be very
You never
polite.
heard your dad say the N-word, and he was the head of the Klan?
No.
You never heard David Duke say the N-word?
No.
Come on.
No, like within the home, it's not an act. Like, they really do want to be polished people, and the reason is because they want to recruit normal people. They don't want extreme, crazy people. They want to get normal white Americans to agree with them, and the way to do that is to be polished and to be professional and to be nice and to not be crude.
So how do they get normal people to come over?
I think you'd actually be surprised. The white nationalist movement's not a big thing, but it's a lot of people who are really quite normal. I went on a road trip once after that election, and I would just cold call people who were members of Stormfront and say, can I visit? I'm coming into town, and we'd hang out. And they're very normal people. They're people with 9-to-5 jobs. They were people who had every profession you could think of, whether lawyer or banker or cop or just every section of society and every socioeconomic status. It's not the stereotype you
So
think.
how would you, if you bumped into somebody on the street and you were trying to figure out whether they were a white nationalist, what would you ask them?
I would ask them, do you think that all this immigration into America is making it worse? Like, do you think that European immigrants are better than other immigrants? Mm-hmm. Do you think that political correctness is just making people not be able to say true stuff? And if they agree to that stuff, they agree with 90% of what white nationalists think.
Wow. There had to be some sort of a code for you to find one another. How big would you say the movement is?
It's hard to say. It's I think 300,000 members on Stormfront on my dad's site.
300,000?
Yeah.
On Stormfront.
And it's hard to assess how many people, because it's up till recently not been something where too many people want to come out publicly because it hurts your career.
And that was your situation. That's basically why you got booted out of that Republican seat you won. And on college, you're walking around with this secret, which then gets unearthed. So what was the aha moment for you, the first aha moment? Where you were like,
white nationalism was
you began to question your beliefs.
I'm not sure there even was one. It was 2 or 3 years of little pieces. And I think a lot of those times I thought I was becoming a better white nationalist because I was having these discussions about what part of our beliefs don't hold up to the evidence. And if
you're very fact-based. All of his writings and book and all, it's all very fact-based.
And if some particular thing, like the way we're using IQ statistics is not, we're abusing them, we're misusing statistics, then I don't want to be using that as evidence. So I'll just say, okay, we're using that wrong, that's wrong. But one thing at a time like that does not undermine your whole worldview.
I should clarify. The racist beliefs are not fact-based, but you are attracted to data, is what I meant to say. And data is how your friends would lure you out of these beliefs.
Yeah, and it is, white nationalists present themselves as using things in a factual, scientific way, or at least a lot of different groups within it do. And they break down crime statistics and IQ statistics, and they say, here's the facts, and they abuse the way statistics and sample sizes work to make these cases. And it sounds very scientific, it sounds very professional.
But your friends use that to the world's advantage to try to appeal to your intelligence, to disabuse you of these beliefs that you had been indoctrinated with. And that's how Derek got out. Now, coming up right after the break, the guy who started it all is here, who helped get him out of that, and the bombshell letter that Derek would write about his beliefs. Don't go away. We're talking now with former white nationalist Derek Black. His college friend, Matthew Stevenson, is here as well. And the author of a new book about Derek's life-changing awakening is with us this morning as well, Washington Post journalist Eli Saslow. So welcome to you guys as well. You're on college campus. You know you're a white nationalist, but you also know that it's something people are not going to respond well to, and people, they catch on. You've got a whole radio show, so people catch on. You were already friends with him, Matthew, right?
I knew him vaguely. Weren't close, but we had spent a couple of, hung out a couple of times.
I would venture to say most people, never mind Jewish men, and Judaism is a target of white nationalists, would have run in the opposite direction. You did something different. Tell us why and what.
Sure. So since I had started at the school, I had been hosting Friday night Shabbat dinners in my dorm room every week, every Friday. And when this news broke about Derek's beliefs, I decided to invite him to join me for one of those Shabbat dinners. And I think that the reasons were really twofold. The first is that I think, according to Kabbalah, everyone has really created this image of the Creator, and regardless of someone's beliefs, I have no right to treat them without human dignity. And secondly, my mother was very involved in AA, and so I felt from a very early age that people could really completely transform and redeem themselves, even out of very, very dark places.
Wow. You didn't hit him over the head with all these stats, because I say he's attracted to data.
Yes.
It was more a slow boil of what?
So, because first of all, I hadn't spent my entire life attacking white nationalism, statistics, and so on. I felt if I had come in, ambushed him, he would have put his defenses, left, and never come back. I thought it would be more productive to create human connections and human bonds. So, in fact, I very intentionally did not discuss the topic with him. Talked about everything else under the sun, but not white nationalism.
And you're starting to feel what?
I'm starting to feel surprised, like being ambushed and having a debate would have been more comfortable than realizing that I have this anti-Semitic belief system, and I really like Matthew, and his dinners are great, and that's more of a conflict than a fight would have been.
That's so interesting. You would have preferred the debate. You would have been more comfortable there, but kindness and love was surprising. Wow. So you wind up writing a public letter to the Southern Poverty Law Center a couple years into this, after having gone to these dinners and so on. And what were you trying to say?
I was trying to say that being silent wasn't a choice, that I had gone through that experience and realized that white nationalism is factually wrong, but also it is actively hurting people, and I've advocated for it. And so I can't just quietly never say anything again. I need to explain that this is wrong, and that was the point.
And then a couple years later, you told me you saw Trump come down the elevator and make the speech about how Mexico's not sending their best people, they're sending some rapists and so on. And you called Eli, who had been pursuing you for your story for a while.
Yeah, a lot of journalists had. There had been a lot of people over those years where I was being as quiet and trying to put everything behind me as I could.
Why was that the moment? Why?
It was because I had always thought that white nationalism was dying away and that everybody was old and that there was no future to it. And then I just wanted to put it behind me, and I realized that the stuff that they say has a lot of potential, and a lot of people have a lot of unchallenged assumptions that work within that belief system.
And you needed to be more vocal.
And being silent is a choice. The only way that you're going to challenge that is not by just shrugging your shoulders. It has to be actively working against this, working against these beliefs.
You've written a whole book now about this.
Right.
And what does Derek's story tell us about the state of our country right now?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the power of this ideology is huge. Unfortunately, these aren't beliefs held by a small number of extremists. Polls consistently show that 30 or 40% of white Americans in this country believe that they experience more prejudice than people of color, which is factually totally wrong. But by playing to that sense of grievance, there's real power in this ideology, and I think we've seen that in very high positions of power in the country. And it took a ton of courage and sustained activism by people on this campus through both civil resistance, outreach, and factual debate to bring somebody to the other side.
Derek's now still in touch with your family, but not with their belief system.
It's tense. We try to stay in touch.
You still love your parents.
Yeah, and that wasn't always obvious that we'd be able to keep talking. That wasn't an obvious outcome. It was a lot of work on their part to make that decision that it's worthwhile being a family, even if there's this huge gulf.
And what are you doing now? What are you going to do with the rest of your life?
I haven't figured that out. I am a graduate student. I study history. I think that's important, but how I'm going to do that, I don't know.
Thank you for telling your story.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping change his beliefs. We'll be right back.